The morning sun peeked through the blinds of Marcus Thompson's modest two-bedroom apartment as he adjusted his blue tie in the mirror. At 32, Marcus had already established himself as one of the most reliable accounting supervisors at Griffin and Associates, where he had worked for the past 5 years. His wife Sarah, still in her nursing scrubs from the night shift, walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Another early morning?" she asked, resting her head on his back. "Got that quarterly review meeting with Mr. Bennett?" Marcus replied, double-checking his presentation folder. "You should get some sleep, honey." As Marcus drove to work that morning, he had no idea his life was about to change forever. The office was buzzing with whispers when he arrived. Janet from HR was crying in the break room, and several senior managers were huddled in serious conversation near the water cooler. "Did you hear about Mr. Bennett?" Marcus's colleague David asked as soon as he reached his desk. "He's in the hospital. Both his kidneys are failing." Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, thinking about Richard Bennett, the company's CEO. Though Bennett had never been particularly warm towards him, Marcus respected the man's business acumen. Under Bennett's leadership, the company had grown from a small local firm to a regional powerhouse. Throughout the day, more details emerged. Bennett had been secretly battling kidney disease for years. Now, at 58, his condition had deteriorated rapidly. He needed a transplant, but finding a match was proving difficult. His only sister wasn't compatible, and the waiting list for a deceased donor was years long. That evening, as Marcus was preparing to leave, he overheard Bennett's secretary, Mrs. Chen, talking about blood type compatibility. "Mr. Bennett is type O negative," she said, wiping her eyes. "It's the rarest blood type, which makes finding a match even harder." Marcus froze. He was O negative too. That night he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, thinking about Bennett, about the company, about his own family. Sarah found him sitting at their kitchen table at 3 a.m., staring into a cup of cold coffee. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. Marcus looked up at his wife, his face troubled. "I'm thinking about getting tested to be a donor for Mr. Bennett." Sarah sat down, her face a mixture of surprise and worry. "Marcus, that's a big decision. We barely know him outside of work. He's never even invited you to any of those golf games he plays with the other managers." "I know," Marcus said quietly, "but I keep thinking, if I could save someone's life, and I choose not to, could I live with that?" Over the next few days, Marcus couldn't shake the idea. He researched living kidney donation, reading about the surgery, recovery time, and potential risks. The more he learned, the more certain he became about his decision. A week later, Marcus walked into HR and asked for information about the company's medical leave policy. Janet, her eyes wide with surprise, handed him the forms. Are you thinking of getting tested?" Marcus nodded. "I'm O negative, like Mr. Bennett." Word spread quickly through the office. Some colleagues called him brave. Others questioned his sanity. A few senior managers even pulled him aside, suggesting he was trying to buy his way up the corporate ladder. The testing process took several weeks. Each positive match result brought Marcus closer to major surgery. Sarah supported his decision but couldn't hide her anxiety. "I just hope you're doing this for the right reasons," she said one night. "And I hope Mr. Bennett appreciates what you're willing to do for him." Finally, the transplant coordinator called with the news. Marcus was a perfect match. When Bennett was informed, he sent a brief email thanking Marcus for his considerable gesture. It was more acknowledgement than Marcus had received from him in years. As Marcus scheduled the surgery, he felt a mix of emotions: nervousness about the procedure, pride in his decision, and hope that this selfless act might bridge the strange distance Bennett had always kept from him. He had no way of knowing that this decision, made with the purest intentions, would set in motion a chain of events that would expose the darkest corners of human nature and challenge everything he believed about justice, dignity, and the human heart. The morning of the surgery arrived with a soft drizzle outside Griffin Memorial Hospital. Marcus lay in the pre-operation room, watching nurses bustle around him while Sarah held his hand. The clock on the wall showed 6:30 a.m., and his surgery was scheduled for 7:00 a.m. In the room next door, Richard Bennett was being prepared for his procedure as well. "Everything will be fine," Sarah whispered, but her tight grip on Marcus's hand betrayed her anxiety. She had taken 2 weeks off from her nursing job to help with his recovery, and their small apartment was already stocked with everything the doctors said you would need. Dr. Williams, the lead surgeon, came in for a final check. "Ready to be a hero, Mr. Thompson?" she asked with a warm smile. Marcus managed a nervous nod. As they wheeled him toward the operating room, he caught a glimpse of Bennett being moved through another door. Their eyes met briefly, but Bennett quickly looked away. The operating room was colder than Marcus expected. The harsh lights above made everything look sharp and sterile. As the anesthesiologist placed the mask over his face, Marcus' last thought was of Sarah's worried smile. Hours later, Marcus woke up to intense pain. Everything hurt, and his mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. Through blurry vision, he could make out Sarah's face. "The surgery was successful," she said, stroking his forehead. "But honey, there were some complications." The complications turned out to be more serious than anyone had anticipated. While Bennett's body accepted the kidney without issues, Marcus developed an infection at the incision site. What should have been a week-long hospital stay stretched into 3 weeks of fever, antibiotics, and worried doctors. During this time, Bennett recovered remarkably well. After just 2 weeks, he was discharged from the hospital. He never visited Marcus, though his room was just down the hall. Instead, his secretary, Mrs. Chen, dropped off a generic get-well card with a gift shop teddy bear. The card simply read, "Thanks for your contribution. Get well soon. R.B." Sarah was furious about Bennett's behavior. Not even a proper visit. She fumed one evening while helping Marcus with his physical therapy exercises. "You gave him your kidney, and he can't walk 50 feet down the hall." Marcus tried to stay positive. "Maybe he's just focused on his own recovery," he said, wincing as he attempted to sit up straighter. "Or perhaps he feels awkward about the whole situation." The long hospital stay was taking its toll on their finances. Though the company's insurance covered the surgery, the extended stay meant more bills, and Sarah had already used up her planned time off. Their neighbors helped when they could, bringing home-cooked meals and offering to clean their apartment. Finally, after 23 days in the hospital, Marcus was cleared to go home. The doctors warned him that his recovery would take longer than usual because of the infection. He would need another month before he could return to work. At home, Marcus struggled with simple tasks. Walking to the bathroom felt like running a marathon. Sleeping was difficult because he could only lie in certain positions. Sarah set up a makeshift bed in their living room since he couldn't climb the stairs to their bedroom. During his recovery, only a few colleagues from work visited. David, his closest work friend, brought updates about the office. "Bennett's already back at work," he reported. "He's telling everyone how great he feels, like he's got a new lease on life." Marcus received occasional emails from HR about his medical leave, all formal and procedural. Bennett never called or messaged to check on his progress. The only communication from him was through his assistant, who sent weekly form emails asking for updates on his return date. One night, as Marcus lay awake dealing with the discomfort, he checked his phone and found an article about Bennett in the local business journal. There was a photo of him at a charity golf tournament, looking healthy and strong. The article praised his quick recovery, but made no mention of the donor who had made it possible. Sarah found Marcus staring at the article. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. "I just thought things would be different," Marcus admitted. "I don't expect special treatment, but basic human decency would be nice," Sarah finished his thought. As Marcus slowly regained his strength, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The distance he'd always felt from Bennett seemed to have grown into something else, something colder. But he pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on getting well enough to return to work. He had no way of knowing that his return would mark the beginning of an even more challenging chapter in his life. After 6 weeks of recovery, Marcus finally returned to Griffin and Associates. He arrived early that Monday morning, wearing his favorite navy suit that now hung a bit loose on his thinner frame. The familiar smell of coffee and printer ink filled the office as he walked to his desk, accepting welcome-back hugs and handshakes from his colleagues. His desk looked exactly as he had left it, except for a thin layer of dust on his family photo frames. Marcus smiled at the picture of him and Sarah at their favorite beach, taken just last summer when everything was normal. As he settled into his chair, David from the next cubicle rolled over. Good to have you back, man, David said quietly. Things have been different around here. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, his computer pinged with a new email. It was the weekly management meeting reminder, a meeting he had always attended as the accounting supervisor. But this time, something was odd. His name wasn't on the invitation list. Thinking it must be a mistake, Marcus walked to Bennett's office. The door was open, but Bennett's secretary, Mrs. Chen, quickly stepped in his path. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but Mr. Bennett is very busy today," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I just wanted to ask about the management meeting," Marcus explained. "I noticed I wasn't on the list." "Oh." Mrs. Chen shuffled some papers on her desk. "Mr. Wilson is handling your team's presentations now. Temporary arrangement while you adjust back to work." Marcus returned to his desk, feeling confused. Tom Wilson was a junior accountant who had joined the company just last year. As Marcus opened his project files, another surprise waited. Most of his ongoing projects had been reassigned. His team of 5 people had been reduced to 2, with the others moved to different departments. During lunch break, Marcus sat with his remaining team members, Lisa and Juan. They seemed nervous, picking at their food and giving short answers to his questions about ongoing work. When he mentioned the management meeting, they exchanged quick glances. "Mr. Bennett said it was to reduce your stress level," Lisa said carefully. "You know, after the surgery and everything." The afternoon brought more strange moments. In the break room, conversations stopped when Marcus entered. People who used to chat freely with him now gave quick nods and hurried away. When he walked past the conference room, he saw Bennett leading a meeting with his former team members, including some projects Marcus had started before his surgery. By Wednesday, the pattern was clear. Every proposal Marcus submitted came back rejected. Simple requests that used to take hours now needed days of approval. His input in meetings, when he was invited at all, was either ignored or dismissed. During a department presentation on Friday, Marcus shared his analysis of a new accounting system, work he had started before his surgery. Bennett interrupted him halfway through. "I think we'll go with Wilson's recommendation on this," Bennett said coldly. "His approach seems more current." Marcus noticed something in Bennett's voice when he spoke to him, a tone he used with no one else. He saw it in Bennett's body language too, the way he would step back slightly if Marcus came too close, how he would use hand sanitizer after accepting papers from him. One evening, staying late to catch up on work, Marcus overheard Bennett talking to someone in the conference room. The door was slightly open. "Having him here makes me uncomfortable," Bennett's voice carried clearly. "Every time I see him, I'm reminded of, but we have to be careful about this. Legal would have a field day if we don't handle it properly." Walking home that evening, Marcus called Sarah. "Something's wrong," he said. "It's like I'm being pushed out, but in tiny steps. Death by 1,000 cuts." "Maybe you're overthinking it," Sarah suggested, but her voice carried doubt. "I mean, he has your kidney. Surely he wouldn't." "I don't think that matters to him," Marcus replied. "In fact, I think it might be the problem." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He thought about all the subtle changes, the excluded emails, the reassigned projects, the cold shoulders, and whispered conversations. Each incident seemed small on its own, but together they painted a disturbing picture. As he lay awake, Marcus remembered something his grandmother used to say: "Sometimes people hate you more after they owe you something." He had never understood that saying until now, watching his career slowly crumble in the shadow of what should have been his most generous act. The truth came to light on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. Marcus had stayed late at the office, trying to make sense of why his latest project proposal had been rejected for the 3rd time. The office was nearly empty, with only the soft hum of the cleaning staff's vacuum in the distance. At 7:30 p.m., while walking to the printer to collect some documents, Marcus noticed Bennett's office door slightly open. The light was still on, but Bennett had left hours ago for an important business dinner. Marcus wouldn't have thought anything of it, except he saw his own name flash across Bennett's computer screen, which had been left on. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen in the doorway. He knew he shouldn't look. Everything in his professional ethics told him to walk away, but after months of unexplained changes and silent treatments, something made him step inside the office. The computer showed Bennett's email inbox. Usually, it would have been locked, But in his rush to leave, Bennett had forgotten to log out. At the top of the screen was an email chain between Bennett and James Morrison, the chairman of the board. The subject line read, Rep. Thompson situation, confidential. Marcus's hands shook as he began to read. Jim. Having that man in my office makes my skin crawl. Every morning I take anti-rejection medications. I'm reminded that I'm alive because of one of them. Do you know how that feels? Owing your life to a black man. The thought of his kidney inside me, I can barely sleep at night. We need to handle this carefully. He was smart enough to donate the kidney. He might be smart enough to sue if we're not careful. I've started documenting performance issues. Give me 3 more months, and I'll have enough to justify termination. Richard. Marcus felt his legs go weak. He grabbed the edge of Bennett's desk to steady himself as he continued reading through the email chain. There were dozens of messages, going back months. In them, Bennett had meticulously planned every step of Marcus's professional isolation. Another email read, Already moved his best team members to other departments. Wilson is helping. Hungry kid, knows which side his bread is buttered on. Thompson's getting the message, but he's stubborn. Keeps trying to prove himself useful. Almost makes it worse, like he's rubbing it in that I needed his help. The timestamps showed some emails were sent while Bennett was still in the hospital, just days after receiving Marcus's kidney. Even then, he had been plotting. As Marcus scrolled, he found more disturbing messages. Bennett had instructed HR to lose Marcus's applications for promotion. He had told other managers to exclude Marcus from important client meetings. There were jokes about buying diversity and crude remarks about keeping them in their place. The sound of the vacuum cleaner getting closer snapped Marcus back to reality. He quickly took photos of the most stunning emails with his phone, his hands trembling so badly he had to retake several shots. Just as he finished, he heard voices in the hallway. Marcus slipped out of the office and made it back to his desk just as the cleaning staff rounded the corner. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely breathe. The weight of what he had discovered felt like a physical presence crushing his chest. On his drive home, Marcus had to pull over twice because his vision blurred with tears of anger and betrayal. He had given this man a part of himself, endured weeks of painful recovery, risked his own health, and all along, Bennett had seen it as some sort of personal insult. Sarah was waiting up for him when he got home. One look at his face told her something was terribly wrong. Marcus, what happened? He couldn't speak at first. Just handed her his phone with the photos of the emails. Sarah read them, her face growing darker with each swipe of the screen. When she finished, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. All this time, she whispered, all those little things we noticed. We weren't imagining it. Marcus sat heavily on their couch. I gave him my kidney, Sarah. A part of my body is keeping that racist alive. That night, neither of them slept. They sat in their living room until dawn, talking through their options. The emails were proof, but Marcus had obtained them by entering Bennett's office without permission. Yet doing nothing meant letting Bennett win, letting him continue his bigoted behavior unchecked. As the sun rose, Marcus made his decision. He wouldn't let Bennett's hatred go unchallenged. The man might have his kidney, but he wouldn't take his dignity too. After discovering Bennett's emails, Marcus watched his career crumble piece by piece. Each day brought new challenges, carefully designed to break his spirit. Bennett's plan was now clear as day, but knowing about it somehow made it even harder to endure. Monday morning started with a surprise performance review meeting. Bennett sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by Tom Wilson and Janet from HR. The thick folder in front of Bennett contained what he called areas of concern. Your numbers are down 40% since your return, Bennett said, not looking directly at Marcus. Your team members have expressed concerns about your leadership. Marcus wanted to point out that his numbers were down because they had taken away most of his projects and team members. Instead, he sat quietly, documenting every word in his notebook. Sarah had advised him to keep detailed records of everything. Later that week, Marcus faced another humiliation during the monthly staff meeting. He had prepared a presentation about cost-saving measures, something he had always excelled at. 5 minutes into his presentation, Bennett interrupted. I think we've heard enough, Bennett said, waving his hand dismissively. Wilson, why don't you share your ideas instead? Wilson, who had been Marcus's junior just months ago, stood up eagerly. His presentation used many of the same points Marcus had included in his rejected proposal last month. As everyone praised Wilson's innovative thinking, Marcus noticed Bennett watching him with a slight smirk. The office atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. People who used to eat lunch with Marcus now made excuses to avoid him. His old friend David still talked to him, but only in whispers by the parking lot after work. "They're scared, Marcus," David explained one evening. "Bennett's been telling the management team that you're becoming unstable since the surgery. Says you're bitter about not getting a promotion and might try to sue the company." Each week brought new documented incidents to Marcus's personnel file. A typo in a report became careless work habits. A 5-minute late arrival due to heavy rain was logged as attendance issues. When he questioned these things, Bennett called it confrontational behavior. The most painful blow came when Lisa, one of his 2 remaining team members, asked for a transfer. Her eyes were red as she told him. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered. "They said my promotion depends on it. I have kids in college." Marcus understood. He couldn't blame her. By month's end, Juan, his last team member, was also gone. Marcus now sat alone in what used to be a busy corner of the office, surrounded by empty desks. Bennett's campaign extended beyond the office. Marcus discovered his name had been removed from the company's annual charity golf tournament committee, an event he had helped organize for 4 years. His parking spot, previously near the entrance due to his supervisor status, was reassigned to the far end of the lot. One afternoon, Marcus overheard 2 managers talking in the break room. "It's sad about Thompson," one said. "He used to be so good at his job." "Well, you know what they say," the other replied. "No good deed goes unpunished." They both went quiet when they noticed him standing there. The final straw came during a client meeting. Marcus was presenting financial projections to an important client when Bennett suddenly walked in. "I apologize for the confusion," Bennett said to the client. "Wilson is handling your account now. Thompson is being reassigned." This was news to Marcus. He sat there, humiliated, as Wilson took over the presentation. The client looked confused but said nothing. That evening, Sarah found Marcus in their home office, staring at his computer screen. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. "Looking at our emails from 6 months ago," he replied. "The ones where Bennett was begging me to get tested as a donor. Funny how things change." Sarah placed her hands on his shoulders. "We have all the evidence now. The emails, your documentation, witnesses who might speak up. Maybe it's time." Marcus nodded slowly. He thought about Lisa's tears, Juan's quiet departure, and all the colleagues who now avoided his eyes in the hallway. He thought about the part of him that was keeping Bennett alive, the same man who was systematically destroying his career. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "Tomorrow I'll call that lawyer David recommended." The office lights were still on in the building across the street, reminding Marcus of that rainy evening when he discovered the truth. He had given Bennett a second chance at life. Now it was time to fight for his own. The day Marcus had been dreading finally arrived on a cold Thursday morning in December. He knew something was wrong the moment he walked into the office and saw Janet from HR standing by his desk, her face tense with discomfort. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "Mr. Bennett would like to see you in the conference room." Marcus felt all eyes on him as he walked through the office. Some people quickly looked away, while others watched with sad expressions. David, his friend, mouthed, "I'm sorry," as he passed by. The conference room felt colder than usual. Bennett sat at the head of the table, looking healthy and robust, thanks to Marcus's kidney. Beside him sat Tom Wilson, 2 members of the HR team, and a man Marcus didn't recognize, who he guessed was a lawyer. "Please take a seat, Thompson," Bennett said, not even using his first name anymore. There was a thick folder in front of him, Marcus's personnel file. "As you know," Bennett began, his voice formal and cold, "we've been documenting ongoing performance issues since your return from medical leave. Despite multiple warnings and opportunities for improvement, your work continues to fall below company standards." Marcus sat quietly, remembering his lawyer's advice. Let them talk. Document everything. Don't sign anything. Bennett continued reading from a prepared statement, listing all the manufactured problems. Missed deadlines that weren't actually missed, complaints from team members who had been pressured to complain, projects that had failed only because they were designed to fail. Your last 3 project proposals were substandard, Bennett said, avoiding eye contact. Your team members have reported feeling unsupported. Your attitude has become increasingly confrontational. Marcus thought about the kidney inside Bennett, still working, still keeping this man alive while he tried to destroy Marcus's career. The irony was almost too much to bear. Furthermore, Bennett continued, your recent behavior has created an uncomfortable work environment. Several colleagues have expressed concerns about your emotional stability. Sarah's voice echoed in Marcus's head. Don't react. That's what they want. Stay calm. He gripped his pen tighter, but kept his face neutral. Janet from HR slid some papers across the table. This is your termination agreement. We're prepared to offer 8 weeks of severance pay, contingent upon signing a non-disclosure agreement and waiving your right to any future legal claims against the company. Marcus looked at the papers but didn't touch them. May I have a copy to review with my lawyer? Bennett's face twitched slightly, the first crack in his professional mask. He hadn't expected Marcus to mention a lawyer so quickly. Of course, the unknown man, definitely a lawyer, spoke for the first time, but the severance offer is contingent upon signing within 48 hours. Marcus stood up slowly. I'll have my lawyer contact you tomorrow. Thompson, Bennett called as Marcus reached the door. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Think about your future. Other companies do check references. The threat was clear, but Marcus just nodded and walked out. The walk back to his desk felt like a walk of shame. Security guards were already there, waiting to escort him out. A final humiliation Bennett had arranged. Marcus could feel his face burning as he packed his family photos and 5 years of memories into a cardboard box. David tried to approach him, but a manager quickly called him away. Lisa, his former team member, was crying quietly at her desk. Juan was nowhere to be seen. As the security guards walked him to the parking lot, Marcus saw his parking spot, the one at the far end, had already been reassigned to someone else. A maintenance worker was changing the nameplate. Sitting in his car, Marcus finally let his emotions surface. His hand shook as he pulled out his phone to call Sarah. Before he could dial, a text message appeared from David. Check your personal email. I sent you something important. Marcus opened his email to find dozens of messages from colleagues, private messages of support, copies of discriminatory emails they'd received from Bennett, screenshots of conversations showing how people had been pressured to turn against him. Last was an email from David with a single line. We're all ready to tell the truth. Just say the word. Marcus took a deep breath and called his lawyer. As the phone rang, he looked back at the Griffin and Associates building, the place where he'd given so much, including a part of himself. Bennett might have taken his job, but Marcus wasn't going to let him take his dignity or justice. Hello, Mr. Ramirez's law office, a voice answered. Yes, this is Marcus Thompson. I'm ready to proceed with the discrimination case, and I have evidence. 3 weeks after his termination, Marcus sat in attorney Michael Ramirez's office, surrounded by stacks of evidence. The small office smelled of coffee and old books, and the walls were covered with framed newspaper articles about civil rights victories. We have a strong case, Ramirez said, adjusting his reading glasses. The emails you found on Bennett's computer might have been obtained improperly, but the supporting evidence from your colleagues is gold. Sarah sat beside Marcus, holding his hand as they looked through the growing pile of testimonies. David had been true to his word. Over 20 current and former employees had come forward with stories about Bennett's discriminatory behavior. Lisa sent another email last night, Sarah said, opening her laptop. She found documents showing how Bennett rejected promotions for 3 other minority employees over the past 2 years. Marcus nodded, remembering how those employees had quietly left the company, their talents wasted. What about Juan? Juan's statement is particularly powerful, Ramirez replied, pulling out a folder. He saved text messages from Wilson ordering him to document any small mistake you made. They were building a fake case against you even while you were in the hospital donating your kidney. The next few days were intense. Marcus and Sarah converted their guest room into a war room, with timelines and evidence pinned to the walls. Former colleagues began visiting after work hours, bringing more documents and stories. One evening, Janet from HR showed up at their door, shaking with nervousness. I can't sleep at night, she confessed, pulling out a USB drive. I kept copies of everything. Bennett made us backdate warnings in your file. He told us our jobs depended on it. The case took an unexpected turn when local reporter Maria Rodriguez got wind of the story. She contacted Marcus through his lawyer, wanting to hear his side. This isn't just about discrimination, Maria said during their meeting at a quiet cafe. This is about human nature at its worst and best. You gave this man life, and he repaid you with hatred. Marcus was hesitant about going public, but Sarah encouraged him. Your story might help others in similar situations, she said. People need to know this happens, even in companies that claim to value diversity. The article was published on a Sunday. By Monday morning, it had gone viral. National news networks picked up the story. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeOrMarcus and #DoneOrDiscrimination. Bennett's first response was to deny everything. Griffin and Associates released a statement calling Marcus a disgruntled former employee seeking attention. But they hadn't counted on the evidence or the number of people willing to speak up. Former employees from other companies where Bennett had worked began coming forward. A pattern emerged. Decades of subtle discrimination, hidden behind corporate policies and carefully worded performance reviews. The turning point came when Wilson, feeling the pressure, cracked during a deposition. Yes, Bennett planned it all, he admitted, avoiding Marcus's eyes. He said having a black man's kidney was humiliating. He wanted Marcus gone but needed to make it look legal. He promised me a promotion if I helped. The company's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Bennett's emails had been leaked online, and clients were threatening to take their business elsewhere. The company's stock was dropping. One evening, as Marcus and Sarah were reviewing documents with Ramirez, David called with news. They're in panic mode, he reported. Bennett tried to delete more emails, but it caught him. The board is meeting tonight. Marcus thought about all the nights he'd spent sick with worry, doubting himself, wondering if he was imagining things. Now, finally, the truth was coming out. Ramirez's phone rang. It was the company's lawyers. The board wanted to discuss a settlement, but they had conditions. They're offering a significant sum, Ramirez explained. But they want this handled quietly. No trial, no more media. Marcus looked at Sarah, then at the wall of evidence they collected. He thought about Lisa's tears, Juan's forced departure, and all the others who'd suffered under Bennett's prejudice. Tell them no, Marcus said firmly. This isn't about money. It's about justice. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else. Sarah squeezed his hand, proud tears in her eyes. Outside, they could hear protesters who had gathered to support their cause. Someone was holding a sign that read, "A gift of life shouldn't cost your livelihood." The fight wasn't over, but for the first time since that rainy night when he discovered the emails, Marcus felt strong. Bennett had his kidney, but he hadn't broken his spirit. 1 year after Marcus's termination, the Griffin and Associates boardroom looked very different. Bennett's portrait, which had hung on the wall for 15 years, was gone. The company's new CEO, an African-American woman named Dr. Patricia Wells, sat where Bennett once ruled. The changes had come like a tidal wave after Marcus refused the quiet settlement, the trial that captured national attention. Every day, the courthouse steps were crowded with supporters, many holding signs with kidney donor rights slogans and anti-discrimination messages. On the final day of the trial, Bennett's carefully built facade crumbled completely. Under intense questioning, he finally snapped. Yes, I couldn't stand knowing I had his kidney inside me. Bennett had shouted in the courtroom, losing all composure. Every morning, taking those anti-rejection pills, knowing I needed one of them to survive. It made me sick. The jury took only 3 hours to reach their verdict. They found Bennett and Griffin and Associates guilty of racial discrimination, workplace harassment, and retaliatory termination. The judgment was the largest ever awarded in a workplace discrimination case involving an organ donor. But Marcus's victory went far beyond money. His case sparked a national conversation about organ donor rights and workplace discrimination. Congress began working on the Thompson Protection Act, a new law designed to protect organ donors from workplace discrimination. Bennett resigned in disgrace. Later, investigations revealed a 20-year history of discrimination at companies he had managed. Other victims began coming forward, and Bennett faced multiple lawsuits. Marcus used most of his settlement money to start the Life Gift Foundation, a non-profit organization supporting organ donors who faced discrimination. Sarah quit her nursing job to help run the foundation full-time. "We need to make sure no other donor goes through what you did," she said, helping him set up their new office. David, who had risked his job to support Marcus, became the foundation's first board member. Lisa and Duan joined too, turning their painful experience into something positive. One morning, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the foundation's office. It was Janet from HR, clutching a folder. "I've been documenting similar cases across the country," she explained. "People who were afraid to speak up before are coming forward now. Your story gave them courage." The foundation's first big success came when they helped Miguel Rodriguez, a factory worker who had donated a kidney to his sister, then faced subtle discrimination at work. Using the precedent set by Marcus's case, they won justice for Miguel and 20 other donors who had similar experiences. Dr. Wells, the new CEO of Griffin and Associates, invited Marcus to speak at the company's diversity training program. Standing at the podium where Bennett once stood, Marcus shared his story with hundreds of employees. "A gift of life should be honored, not punished," he told them. "Change starts with each of us choosing to stand up for what's right." The company underwent a complete transformation. Under Dr. Wells's leadership, they established the strongest donor protection policies in the industry. The toxic culture Bennett had created was replaced with one of inclusion and respect. On the first anniversary of the verdict, Marcus received a letter from an unexpected source, Bennett's daughter. "I want you to know," she wrote, "that your kidney didn't just save my father's life. Your fight for justice opened his eyes. He's getting counseling now, finally confronting his prejudices. It's a long journey, but it started with your courage." Sarah found Marcus on their back porch that evening, reading the letter again. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. "You know what's strange?" Marcus replied, "I don't regret donating the kidney. Even after everything, it showed who he really was, and it led to changes that are helping others." The local news did a follow-up story about the foundation's work. They filmed Marcus meeting with a group of donor rights advocates at his office. On the wall behind his desk hung a framed quote, "Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the courage to stand up for what's right." That night, at a foundation fundraiser, Marcus looked around at all the faces, donors, recipients, advocates, and allies. Dr. Wells was there, along with David, Lisa, Juan, and many others who had supported him through the darkest times. "One person's hatred tried to break you," Sarah whispered, squeezing his hand. "Instead, it sparked a movement." Marcus smiled, thinking about how his personal tragedy had transformed into triumph, not just for him, but for donor rights across the country. Bennett had tried to destroy him because of a gift of life, but that same gift had become a catalyst for change that would help generations to come.